Hello, and welcome to the online information session for the National Endowment for the Humanities Public Scholars Program. My name is Mark Silver. I'm a program officer in the NEH Division of Research Programs. And also on the call is my colleague, Gwen Yates, who is the program analyst for the Public Scholars Program. This session is scheduled to last for about 1 hour, from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock Eastern Time. I'm planning to make a presentation that should last just about 30 minutes, and then I'll take questions from you for the remainder of the hour. I have a slide that will give you an overview of the topics I'm planning to cover, so let me bring that up. I'm going to start off by talking about the goals of the program and its scope, and I'll explain the eligibility requirements. I'll go over some key details of the program, including the time commitment that we expect from grant recipients. We'll look at the review criteria, the application materials that you have to submit, and the mechanics of submitting your application. And then we'll get to your questions. I'll take questions using the Q&A window that you should have on your screen. It's easier for us to handle those questions if you wait until the end of the presentation to enter them. So please hold your questions until I've finished with the presentation. And then I'll answer as many of them as I can. If we don't get to your question, please feel free to send us an email with your question. Our address is publicscholars@neh.gov, and I'll put that email address up on the final slide as well. We will, by the way, be posting a recording of this session on the website. So if you want to refer to it later as you're preparing an application, it will be available there. Please allow us about 1 week to prepare and post it. My hope is that this session will help you decide whether this program is right for you. And if you do decide that it's right for you, that you'll understand at the end of it what it takes to submit a strong application. First, I want to talk about the goals of the program. Our overarching goal is to support the creation of well-researched nonfiction books in the humanities written for a broad public. Related to that goal, we want to encourage writers who are outside of the academic world to deepen their engagement with the humanities by strengthening the research underlying their books. We know that deep research takes time, it takes effort. It's not always possible to put as much research into a book as you might like to. So we want to help to solve that problem. We also want to encourage academic writers in the humanities to communicate the significance of their research to the broadest possible range of readers. Just as it takes time and effort to do good research, it also takes time and effort to write effectively for a general audience. And if you're a professional scholar, it's in some ways easier to write for other scholars. That's probably what you were trained to do. So writing for a general audience requires some adjustment. It may require that you find a new voice for yourself as a writer. So we hope this program will encourage you to make that adjustment. The scope of the program is what I want to touch on next here. We welcome applications in all areas of the humanities, regardless of geographical or chronological focus. If you look at the list of awards that we've made so far in this program, and we've made over 200 awards so far, you'll see that the list is dominated by projects that have an American focus. But we don't actually have a preference for projects with an American focus. We welcome proposals having to do with any geographic area or historical period. The books supported by this program must be written in a readily accessible style, and they must frame their topics to have wide appeal. This is absolutely crucial in this program. If you're not interested in devoting energy to these things, then this is not the right program for you. And as the slide says, books written primarily for an audience of professional scholars are not suitable. So that's just to reiterate the point. This slide shows some recently published books sponsored by the program. On the left is a book by music critic and author Jeremy Eichler called Time's Echo: The Second World War, the Holocaust, and the Music of Remembrance. That was published by Alfred A. Knopf just last month. In the middle is The 272, the families who were enslaved and sold to build the Catholic Church. This is by Rachel Swarns, who's a professor of journalism at New York University, and it was published in June by Random House. On the right is Teresa McPhail's book, Allergic: Our Irritated Bodies in a Changing World, which came out just this past May. That was also published by Random House. Teresa McPhail is a medical anthropologist teaching at the Stevens Institute of Technology. Next, I want to talk about what we mean by the humanities. The founding legislation of the National Endowment for the Humanities lists a number of disciplines that are meant to be encompassed by the term humanities. The legislation makes it clear that this is not intended to be an exhaustive list, but it does mention these disciplines on the slide: history, literature and language, history and theory of the arts, philosophy and ethics, archaeology, comparative religion, jurisprudence, and those social sciences employing humanistic methods. If you're not certain about whether your project would fall within the humanities, that's a discussion we're happy to have. We can talk that over with you and give you some guidance. So feel free to get in touch if you have questions about that. Next up, the eligibility requirements. The program's open to all US citizens. It doesn't matter where you are in the world, and also to foreign nationals who've been living in the US for the 3 years preceding the November 29th application deadline. Currently enrolled students are not eligible to apply. We also have a previous publication requirement in this program. You can meet this requirement in one of two ways: either with a nonfiction book published with a commercial or university press, and that book could be an academic book. An academic monograph is perfectly okay for meeting this requirement. Or the other way you can meet the requirement is with 3 articles or essays in general interest publications that reach a large audience. No advanced degree is required to apply to this program, and no institutional affiliation is required either. In fact, on that last point, we have a special encouragement in place for independent writers. The program encourages applications from writers who are not currently affiliated with a college or university. Maybe you're a full-time biographer, or you're a journalist, or a magazine writer, or an editor. Or maybe you have a day job that's unrelated to writing and you write at night. If you have a suitable project, we want you to know about this opportunity. We also know there are people who have only a short-term affiliation with a college or a university, or who might, for various reasons, have one foot in the academic world and 1 foot out. We want you to be aware of the program and the support that it could offer you as well. None of this, by the way, is meant to suggest that we don't want to hear from full-time university or college professors. Long-term professional academics are entirely welcome to apply. We absolutely do want to see those applications. It's just that our application pool tends to be dominated by professional scholars already, and we want to broaden our reach to other kinds of applicants because we know you're out there. I want to talk about the types of projects that are not supported by the program. There are a number of different types that we don't support. You definitely need to be aware of these. The program does not support fiction, including historical fiction or philosophical fiction. It doesn't support autobiography or memoir or books for children or young adults or works of graphic fiction or nonfiction. And we don't support dissertation revisions in this program either. You should be sure to check the full list of prohibited project types to make sure that you're not submitting an application to us that will be a non-starter. That full list appears in section D6 of the Notice of Funding Opportunity, which is a very important document I'll be referring to a number of times, and I'll explain to you exactly where you can find it later in the presentation. Next up, a number of key details regarding the awards. We're buying your time with these awards, so we're quite strict about the rules that appear on this slide. The minimum duration for an award period is 6 months of full-time work or the equivalent. So you could, for example, work half-time for 12 months on your project, and that would meet the requirement since it's the equivalent of 6 full-time months. The maximum duration is 12 months. And that's true even if you're working part-time on the project. So you cannot run your calendar longer than 12 months under any circumstances. You cannot work less than half-time on your project at any point during the award period, and you must hold the award continuously. How much money would you get? The stipend is $5,000 per full-time month. So the maximum award is $60,000, which would be for 12 full-time months. We reduce the dollar amount accordingly in the event that you're working part-time or if you're working less than 12 full months on your project. The application deadline is November 29th, 2023, and you'll hear an answer from us in the first half of August 2024. So it takes us about 9 months to review your application and give you an answer. And obviously you need to account for that in your planning. If you were notified that you've won an award in August of 2024, the earliest possible start date for holding that award would be September 1st. In other words, you could start holding the award almost immediately. The latest possible start date would be 1 year after that, which would be September 1st of 2025. So again, as you're planning your project and your schedule, you need to be well aware of the timeline that I've laid out here and take that into account. Typical activities and products in this program appear on the next slide here. We support research in primary and secondary sources. That research could include interviews or field work of some kind. We support travel. That could be travel to archives or to other research sites. And we also support writing and or revision of your manuscript. The typical products are print books, generally published with a trade press or with a university press that has strong marketing and distribution. You are permitted to propose online materials intended to supplement a print book, but the primary product in that case would still have to be a print book. We also see people including ebooks and or audiobooks as part of their publication plan, and those are also entirely welcome. This slide shows the review criteria for the program. Every application will be reviewed by a panel of external peer reviewers, and these are the criteria we instruct them to use in their evaluations. As an applicant, you absolutely must keep these criteria in mind as you're preparing your application, and you should try to write the application to answer these criteria. The review criteria are published in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Let me take a moment to go through them one by one here. The first one is the appeal and intellectual significance of the proposed book for general readers. This is the #1 criterion for a reason. It is in many ways the most important criterion, and both aspects of it, the appeal and also the intellectual significance, are important. So your topic should be framed in a way that makes it engaging and interesting. The writing should carry the reader along without undue effort, but the book should also have intellectual substance. Second, the applicant's record of research and experience in interpreting the humanities for general audiences. As an applicant, you want to think about how to highlight your record in these areas, both on your resume and in your application narrative. The third criterion is the quality of the conception, definition, organization, and description of the project, and the breadth and depth of the humanities research underlying the project. Your project should be well-defined and well-organized. The book should be based on rigorous research, and your application should show that you're aware of the relevant sources and of related books in your area. The fourth criterion is the quality of the writing sample and the applicant's clarity of expression. The writing sample is extremely important in this program because that's where you're demonstrating for evaluators that you really can write for a popular audience. It's best to submit a draft chapter from your proposed book as the writing sample if you can, but if that's not possible, make sure that your selection really showcases your skill in writing for a general reader. That's the most important thing the evaluators will be looking for in your writing sample. The fifth criterion is the feasibility and appropriateness of the proposed plan of work, the soundness and probable reach of the dissemination plan, and the likelihood that the applicant will complete the project, not necessarily during the grant period. In the plan of work, you need to present a clear schedule of tasks, including the amount of time you're going to spend on each one. And your application should also address the question of dissemination. How are you going to publish the book? How will you make sure that the book gets noticed? You want to think about the press that you're going to publish the book with, and in general, the bigger the print run that press is able to promise, and the stronger their publicity and distribution operation, the better. It will help your application to have a publication contract at the time you apply, but that is not required. And I can show you some statistics about that here. About half the projects that we funded so far did not have a contract at the time of publication. About 15% had a university press contract, and about 35% had a trade press contract. The caveat here on the slide is that of those applicants who received funding without a contract at the time of application, most had a strong previous record of publication with general audiences or for general audiences, or they had a letter of interest from a publisher as part of the application, or both of those things. What application materials do we ask you for when you submit your application? Here's a list. We want to have a 3-page single-space narrative, a 1-page plan of work, a 1-page bibliography, 2-page resume or CV, a 20-page double-spaced writing sample, and a publisher's letter if applicable. So if you have interest from a publisher or if your book's under contract, you should submit a letter with your application from a representative of the press, indicating the press's level of commitment to your project. And if your book is under contract and you've discussed the size of a possible print run with the publisher, I'd encourage you to include that information in the letter as well. And also any plans for publicity, book tours, and so forth that might be connected with your book. You should arrange for 2 letters of reference. Those are not actually due until January 23rd, which is several weeks after the application deadline. You should coach your letter writers to study the evaluation criteria that I had up on the screen there and to address those criteria in their letters. You should also coach your letter writers to specifically address your proposed project rather than simply talking about previous work that you may have done and then ending with a line to say, and I'm sure the proposed book will be just as good. It's much more effective to have a letter writer address the specifics of the project that you are proposing. There's some additional online forms in the application package asking you to provide a 1,000-character project summary, to identify your letter writers, and to list the locations where you'll be working during the grant period. No budget is required, and that's because, as I explained before, the dollar amount of the award is based on the number of months that you commit to as your grant period. Before I leave this slide, I just want to emphasize that there are page limits here on all of these items that you submit, and we're strict about those page limits. So be sure that you adhere to those page limits. If you exceed them, you'll be subject to disqualification. This slide has a list of resources for you as an applicant. The single most important one is the Notice of Funding Opportunity, which I've mentioned a few times already. This document is available as a link on the web page that you used to join this session today. The Notice of Funding Opportunity is about a 20-page document. It includes all the instructions for assembling and formatting your materials, as well as the instructions for submitting them to us. So if you're not familiar with that document yet, and you think you're interested in applying to the program, this would definitely be your next step to read through the Notice of Funding Opportunity. We also have available on the website sample application narratives. There are 9 examples there of successful applications that you can study. There's also a list of recently funded projects in the program and another document with frequently asked questions that you can refer to as well. All of these things are available on the link that I have on the slide here. That's the program page for the Public Scholars Program. Then the last item on the list, and not to be neglected, is advice from us on the staff. The email address you can use to reach us and the phone number are there on the slide. We can usually get back to you more quickly by email, but we're available by phone as well. We're not able to comment on draft applications, but we can respond to specific questions that you have about your application. A few words about the mechanics of submitting your application. You'll need to register at the website grants.gov, which is the portal that you'll use to submit your application. And as part of that registration process, you also need to create an account at login.gov, which issues user credentials for government websites. Once you've registered at grants.gov, you have to create an individual applicant profile in your account. Failing to do this is probably the most common mistake that people make when trying to submit an application. If you haven't set up an individual applicant profile in your grants.gov account, the red button that says apply on the application page will be grayed out and you won't be able to click on it. That's where I have the yellow arrow pointing on this slide. So if you're trying to apply, but that red apply button is not actually red and it's grayed out, that means you need to set up your individual applicant profile. And there are instructions for doing that in the notice of funding opportunity. Third point, you should allow several days to submit your application in case you run into a technical problem of some kind. So submit early, especially if you're doing this for the first time. It can be a little bit cumbersome. So just keep that in mind and allow some extra time for the process of just submitting your application through grants.gov. There is a help desk offered by grants.gov, and I have the phone number there on the slide. It's 1-800-518-4726, or you can email them at support@grants.gov. And the people at that help desk can help you with technical problems much better than we here at NEH can. So I encourage you to get in touch with the help desk at grants.gov if you're having a problem using their website or submitting your application. All right, so that's the end of the presentation that I prepared. And as promised, here's our contact information once again. publicscholars@neh.gov is the email address, the phone number 202-606-8200. So now I'll spend time answering questions from you, and my colleague Gwen Yates is going to help me manage those questions. So I'll ask her what we have so far. And if you're not seeing the Q&A window on your screen, you may need to open it depending on your browser. And what you need to do to open the Q&A function is to click on the icon that I have circled in red here on this slide. It looks like a speech balloon with a question mark in it. Okay, Gwen, are you there? And do we have some questions that have come in?
Yes, we have a few. The first question is, what exactly do you mean by a readily accessible style?
Yeah, that's a good question. It means that the book should be readable for any curious person. You should be careful that you're explaining specialized terms, that you're not using jargon, particularly jargon that is field specific or that may not be easily understandable to non-specialists. If you do need to use specialized terms as part of your discussion, think about how you can explain what they mean to your reader, so that, as I said, any curious person who is interested in reading the book will be able to follow it and won't end up putting it down after 10 or 12 pages because it's simply too hard to follow.
Okay, next question is, if our project requires use of foreign language sources, what evidence do you need to prove foreign language competence?
We don't necessarily require particular evidence of competence in that, for example, we don't ask you to give us test results or something like that. However, we do have a place on your on the resume, or we ask that on your resume or CV you list relevant foreign language competence, and then you should, if work in foreign languages is an important part of your project, you should discuss how you're going to carry that out in the application. You could address it in the work plan as well. And you could mention also previous work that you have done. If you've published something already that's based on work in foreign language sources, that could certainly help the evaluators understand what your background is. And if you have publications that would be relevant in that way, you should certainly list those on your resume or CV as well. There is a section of the application where we ask you to use the heading competencies, skills, and access. And that would be the appropriate place within the application narrative to talk about your competence in the foreign language that you're talking about working in.
Next question is, please define full and part-time hours. How are these verified?
So generally, if you're working full-time on your project, we expect that you are not teaching. So if you work at a college or university, you would need to have no teaching load during the time that you're working on an award full-time. And we also ask you to forgo other major activities. So that would also include heavy administrative responsibilities. If you are working in an academic setting, we would not allow you to spend 10 hours a week working with dissertation advisees, for example, even though that wouldn't be connected formally with a class that you're teaching necessarily. So if you have teaching responsibilities and you're going to be working full-time, you need to arrange to be released from those teaching responsibilities. If you're not a professor or a teacher and you don't have teaching responsibilities, the expectation is that you, and I guess this is true even if you do have teaching responsibilities, the general expectation is that full-time commitment is 40 hours per week that you're devoting to the project. Part-time commitment would be somewhere between half-time and full-time. So, for example, if you are going to carry a half-time teaching load, then you could work half-time on your NEH project and teach half-time. But we would ask that you be just carrying a half-time load based on the normal expectation for teaching load at your home campus. So a half-time commitment, generally speaking, is 20 hours per week. We can, by the way, handle really any fraction of time between half-time and full-time. So if you need to, if you're going to work on your project 5/7 time and do something else 2/7 time, you know, we can handle that sort of fraction, whatever you need to have in terms of making meeting other obligations that you might have, and also meeting the obligations to the NEH that come with winning an award.
Okay, next question. Can we apply if our first publication is in production with the university press at the time of application?
It would depend on whether you otherwise meet the requirement for previous publication. So the rules, which are laid out in detail in the notice of funding opportunity, the rules say that you can't count a not yet published work towards meeting our publication requirement. So if you have something, if your first book is still in press at the time of the application deadline, and you can't meet the requirement by the other route available, which is 3 articles or essays in widely read general interest publications, then you wouldn't be able to apply. You would have to wait until the next application deadline and apply then once your book had actually been published.
Can you explain a bit more of what the one-page plan of work might look like?
Sure, that's a great question. And as the questioner understands, we do ask for one page, and we allow you a 1 full page to explain your plan of work. The first thing I'll say is the more detail you can provide here, the better. It happens with great regularity that the evaluators like a project, they think it has that it's going to lead to an engaging book. They like the topic, but they have questions about what the applicant would actually do with the time afforded by a grant. So you don't want to leave things sort of vague about how you're going to be spending your time during the grant period. I recommend that you provide a detailed timeline breaking down the grant period, probably into 1-month segments. And you might say, for example, indicate which archives you're planning to visit and during which months of the grant period, how much time you're going to spend in each archive, what materials you'll be gathering in those archives that are relevant to your project. If you're going to be writing, then I would indicate which chapters of the manuscript you're going to be working on during which months, what you're going to have accomplished at the end of the grant period as well, what people refer to in the business community as deliverables. So what are you committing to accomplishing by the time the grant period has ended? You do not, by the way, need to finish a manuscript or promise to submit it to your publisher at the end of the grant period. You're welcome to carve out a particular piece of the larger project to work on during the grant period. You just need to explain to us what that piece is, make very clear how it fits into the larger project, and then address the question of how you will ultimately finish the whole thing and when you'll have that done by. So again, the more detail you can provide in the work plan, the better. You want to avoid having sort of doubts lingering in the minds of the evaluators about how you're going to use the time and what you're going to accomplish. Most successful work plans, the applications in most successful applications do use the whole page one way or another to present the work plan. You can, by the way, present information using a chart or a table of some kind. If you'd like to do that as part of your work plan, that's entirely acceptable, and many people do that. It can be useful, a useful way to present the information clearly.
Okay, what is an appropriately sized print run for a book supported by this program?
That's another good question. We don't have hard and fast rules about that. In other words, we don't have a minimum print run. In some cases, people don't have a contract yet, as I showed on one of those slides, about half of the awards we've made so far have gone to people who don't have a contract yet. And so we don't know what the size of the print run will be in those cases. And even if someone does have a contract, it may be still a little early for the publisher to make a commitment to a print run. So all that said, for people who do have a letter from a publisher specifying a print run, the typical range for projects getting funding is, I would say, 3,000 to 5,000 plus. We do see much higher print runs than that, 15,000, 25,000, 75,000 copies promised by a publisher. We understand that there's a trend towards smaller print runs, greater reliance on ebooks, print on demand, and so forth. And so that's one reason we don't have hard and fast rules about print runs. We have funded projects with print runs smaller than the 3,000 number that I mentioned there. The other thing to keep in mind is the print run is one aspect of your application. It's taken into consideration, or the dissemination plan and the state of the dissemination plan is taken into consideration. And the stronger that plan is, the greater the benefit to you as an applicant. But it is just one aspect of the package. And I mean, the flip side of that is we regularly turn down applications that are promising large print runs because they've fallen short in some other aspect of the evaluation criteria.
Can you share the top presses, publishers your authors publish with?
I'm not sure I'll name names of presses, but they're well-known trade presses and top university presses. As I said, the most important thing really about the press is that it have the capacity to market your book effectively and then to distribute it, to get it out there into channels where people will be able to buy it easily, where it will be noticed. So if you're deciding on a publisher, I would certainly talk to the publisher's representative about how they look at the problem of dissemination or the challenge of dissemination, what they imagine doing in terms of calling attention to your book once it is published, and whether they can point you to examples of other books that they've gotten behind that did well in terms of winning media attention, winning readers, and establishing an audience for the book.
Are travel and other marketing publishing expenses separate from the $60K award for time?
Could you say that one more time, Gwen?
Mm-hmm. Are travel and other marketing publishing expenses separate from the $60K award for time?
So the answer is no. The maximum award that we make in the program is $60,000, and we don't offer additional money on top of that maximum award, but because we don't require a budget, you don't have to tell us exactly how you're going to use the money. What we expect you to do is to make the time commitments that I talked about and to use the money in support of your project. So if you want to put some of that money towards travel, that's fine. If you need to buy groceries with it, that's fine as well. So the money needs to be used in support of the goals of the project, researching, writing the book, and getting it noticed in the world.
If given the award, will there be any check-ins with any age during the 6 to 12-month award period? Will any age have any influence on the content of the book?
So we don't have check-ins during the award period. We do ask you to submit a final performance report within 90 days of the end of your award period. You need to tell us how it went, whether you ran into problems, what you accomplished with the grant in that report. We do not control the content of the book. So once you have met the requirements of the program with your application and the application has been approved, then you're free to write that book that you've been approved for. We have stipulations about within our list of prohibited project types and project activities. You can't, for example, use the taxpayer money that we're distributing to engage in lobbying efforts. We would expect that you adhere to the terms and conditions of the award during the period, but we're not spying on you during the award period to see what you're doing.
You just addressed a criteria about lobbying, but this next question is asking, how would the committee assess a project about a politically contentious issue?
That's a good question. We expect that the proposal that is approved by NEH would not be lobbying for a particular program of political action or particular legislation, or promoting a particular ideological or political point of view. So the committee would be looking at the proposal and asking whether the proposal seems to be taking a properly balanced approach in terms of laying out issues for a reader who may be coming to the topic without much background knowledge. So if you're working in an area that involves some kind of politically contentious issue, you want to think carefully about the impression that your analysis of the issues involved is going to make on the evaluators, and think about exercising proper critical balance in your proposal.
Would a co-edited publication qualify? Also, what constitutes a general interest publication? Are academic journals not general interest?
Let's see, I'll take the last one first, and then you may have to remind me of the other parts of it. So in terms of meeting the requirement that we have for previous publication, we do not accept articles published in academic journals as meeting that requirement. So if you have published in a peer-reviewed academic journal or a peer-reviewed edited volume, those publications unfortunately would not be countable towards our requirement for 3 articles or essays in general interest publications. And another part of the question, I think, was what constitutes a general interest publication? Is that right, Gwen?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. So what we're looking for in terms of a general interest publication is that it's read by people who don't have a professional interest in the material. That's important. So that's one reason academic journals are ruled out, since they tend to be read by academics who have an interest in that particular field, by and large. We're looking for publications that would be let's say if you go to a typical airport and you go to the newsstand there, most of the publications on sale there are things that would meet our requirement for general interest publications, because that newsstand is selling to all sorts of people who come through the airport. Major newspapers, major magazines, potentially smaller publications, as long as they don't have a particular narrow focus. They're treating a broad range of issues and trying to do so in a way that would appeal to a broad range of readers, are likely to meet the requirement. If you have questions about whether a particular publication satisfies the requirement, you're welcome to get in touch with us about that, and we can give you a verdict about whether you would qualify for the program based on your publications.
Is there a time limit on the writing samples? I have samples back to the 1980s.
There is not. If you've followed this program over the years, in the past, we have had a requirement that the writing sample not be more than 5 years old, but we've changed that. We no longer impose any limit on the age of the writing sample. So you'd be welcome to use a writing sample from the 1980s as part of your application.
When you mentioned that the award does not support dissertation revisions, could you elaborate further?
So if you have completed a dissertation as part of your graduate education, you would not be able to use a Public Scholars Award to revise, edit, do additional research for that dissertation manuscript to turn it into a book. We do have other programs that allow you to do that. The NEH Fellowships Program and the NEH Summer Stipends Program would be suitable for dissertation revisions. Sometimes the question arises about a book that's in some way based on a dissertation, but maybe the dissertation was done a long time ago, and only certain parts of the dissertation are going to appear in the book. Or for other reasons, the applicant feels that it's not a sort of normal dissertation revision. And if that's the case, and that's where the question is coming from, again, I recommend that you get in touch with us and we can discuss whether the application would be eligible or not. And as a general piece of advice, if you fall in that category, I would think about trying to address somewhere in your application narrative why what you're proposing is not, strictly speaking, a dissertation revision. But the best thing to do would be to get in touch with us with the specifics, and we can talk about that with you.
Do you prefer recommenders who have academic affiliations or who are public writers?
Good question again. It depends a little bit on, I think it depends on what your own background is as an applicant. And you might want to think about sort of counterbalancing that a bit. So if you're a journalist, say, you're not coming from the academic world, then I would try to have at least one recommender who does have a firm academic footing in the area that you're proposing to write about, who can vouch for the approach that you're taking and vouch for it as work that's not going to be simply duplicating something that's already been done or that is more or less known in the field. If you are an academic, conversely, you might think about looking for a recommender who's not an academic, who has experience writing for a general audience, who can sort of help you tick that box as in your application, that the book you're proposing and the way you're thinking of approaching the topic has promise in terms of appeal to general audience readers. If you can get a recommendation from an academic who has written for general audiences, then that might also be someone to consider, because that very identity is helping you sort of cover both sides that we're asking you to cover in these applications. That is, intellectual substance as well as appeal for the general reader. So I would think about how each recommender that you ask for a letter is contributing to the whole package and the whole impression that your application is creating. As long as I'm on the topic of recommenders, let me say a couple of other things. First of all, having big names as your recommenders is not nearly as important as having people who will really take the time to write a nice letter for you. A letter that will address the evaluation criteria of this particular program and speak to the proposed project, as opposed to focusing the letter on previous work that you've done. So you want to find people who know you and your work and who are going to take the time with writing the letter. That's much more important than having letters from famous people.
Do you accept collaborative applications?
This program is designed primarily for individual applicants. However, we do accept collaborative projects. And there are instructions about this in the notice of funding opportunity, so you should look there for the full explanation of this. But basically, if you have a collaborator or collaborators, and you're seeking funding from NEH, then you need to explain the collaboration, who these other people are, how your work fits together with theirs. And you cannot divide an award with those people. The award would just go to you. So if you have collaborators who also want support from the program, so say you're working on a co-authored book and you and your co-author both want to have the support of the Public Scholars Program, then you would each need to submit a separate application. And there might be a good deal of overlap in the project descriptions in those two applications, but each application would need to be submitted separately, one from each person who's seeking support, and the evaluators will evaluate each application separately. Again, there's more information about that in the notice of funding opportunity, so I direct you to that document.
Are op-ed publications and member association newsletters considered as 3 proofs of widespread publications?
So a member association newsletter probably would not meet our requirement for general interest publications because it tends to be focused on speaking to that particular audience who hold memberships in the organization in question. Op-eds, on the other hand, if they're published in widely read newspapers, would meet the requirement for publication in a general interest publication. So those 3 articles or essays could potentially be rather short. An op-ed usually isn't all that long. But if it was published in a widely read general interest publication, then it would indeed count towards that requirement. I think we have time for one more question.
Is the project summary on the online form basically a summary of the 3-page narrative?
Short answer, yes. That's what we're looking for. That project summary is going to appear on the cover page of your application. We create a cover page and attach it to the application when we send out your application to the external evaluators. So you should spend some time with that project summary. it's just a 1,000 character summary, not 1,000 words, but 1,000 characters. So it's quite short. I would be strategic in designing that statement so that it makes a strong first impression, since, as I said, it's the first thing that the external evaluators will read when they're sizing up your application and judging its merits. But yes, it should essentially summarize the project in a compelling way. All right, it is now 3 o'clock Eastern time, so we're going to stop here. Thank you all for your interest in the program and for listening to the presentation and for asking these good questions. As I said at the outset, if we didn't get to your question, feel free to send it to us at publicscholars@neh.gov. That's our email address on the slide. You can also give us a call at 202-606-8200. All right, thank you everybody, and goodbye.